Dylan Carter pulled a dying woman from a burning wreck and vanished without a name. 2 years later, she found him and lied about everything. Now his son is dying, and the woman who broke his heart is the only one who can save him. But some betrayals cut too deep for money to heal. If you want to see how love, lies, and second chances collide in the most unexpected ways, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The smell hit Dylan first: burnt rubber, hot metal, something sweet and chemical that made his stomach clench. He'd been driving Route 12 for 15 years, knew every pothole and blind curve by heart, but he'd never smelled anything like this at 4:30 in the morning. The fog was thick enough to taste, clinging to his windshield in sheets, and for a second he thought about just keeping his foot on the gas. He had a 6 a.m. oil change scheduled and his son's breakfast to make, and approximately 0 extra minutes in his life for whatever trouble was hiding in that fog. Then he saw the tire marks. They cut across both lanes in a violent zigzag, black against wet asphalt, and disappeared into the tree line like something had been yanked off the road by an invisible hand. Dylan's foot hit the brake before his brain caught up. His truck shuddered to a stop, hazards clicking in the silence, and he sat there for 3 full seconds telling himself it was probably nothing. Deer strike, blown tire, some kid who'd overcorrected and walked away, but the smell wasn't going away. He grabbed his flashlight from the glove box and stepped out into the fog. The air was cold enough to burn his lungs, damp enough to soak through his jacket in seconds. He crossed the road and followed the tire marks into the trees, his boots crunching over broken glass and twisted chrome. 20 feet in, he found it. The car, if you could still call it that, was wrapped around an oak tree like a piece of crumpled paper. The front end had accordioned back into the cabin, metal folded over metal in ways that made Dylan's chest tighten. The driver's side door was gone. Just gone. Ripped clean off, or maybe thrown somewhere in the impact. Steam hissed from the engine block, and the windshield was a spiderweb of cracks with a dark smear across the center that Dylan tried very hard not to think about. He moved closer, flashlight beam cutting through the steam. That's when he saw her. She was still in the driver's seat, or what was left of it. Slumped sideways against the console, head tipped at an angle that sent a spike of pure adrenaline through Dylan's veins. Blood ran down her temple in a thin line, soaking into her white blouse, and her breathing, Jesus, her breathing, was shallow and wet and wrong, in a way that made every instinct in his body scream move. Dylan didn't think. He dropped the flashlight, grabbed the frame where the door used to be, and leaned in. The metal was still hot, biting into his palms, but he didn't care. He got one arm around her shoulders, the other under her knees, and pulled. She was lighter than he expected. Fragile. Her head lolled against his chest, and up close he could see the cuts on her face, the glass embedded in her hairline, the way her lips had gone pale. "Hey," he said, his voice rough. "Hey, stay with me." No response. He carried her back to the road, moving fast but careful, and laid her down on the shoulder. Her pulse was there, thin and fluttering under his fingers, but her skin was cold, too cold, and he didn't know if that was shock or blood loss or something worse. He pulled off his jacket and covered her, then grabbed his phone and dialed 911 with shaking hands. "There's been an accident on Route 12, mile marker 43. Single vehicle, wrapped around a tree. Driver's unconscious, head trauma, possible internal injuries. I need an ambulance now." The dispatcher's voice was calm, mechanical, asking him questions he barely heard. He answered on autopilot. "Yes, she's breathing. No, I don't know her name. No, I didn't see it happen," while his eyes stayed locked on the rise and fall of her chest. Every breath looked like it cost her something. "Sir, can you stay on the line until the paramedics arrive?" "Yeah, I'm here." But he wasn't sure she was. The ambulance came screaming out of the fog 12 minutes later, lights strobing red and white across the trees. Dylan stepped back as the paramedics swarmed her, their movements quick and efficient, calling out vitals and terms he didn't understand. One of them looked up at him, young guy with tired eyes. "You pull her out?" "Yeah, good." Another 5 minutes and she wouldn't have made it. They loaded her onto a stretcher, strapped her down, and slid her into the back of the ambulance. The doors slammed shut, and then they were gone, sirens fading into the distance, leaving Dylan standing alone on the side of the road with blood on his hands and fog in his lungs. He looked back at the wreck, at the tree with its bark stripped away, at the metal glinting in the early light, at the tire marks that told a story he'd never know the ending to. Then he got in his truck and drove home. By the time Dylan pulled into his driveway, the sun was starting to crack the horizon, spilling pale gold light across Millhaven's quiet streets. The house was dark except for the porch light he'd left on, a small two-bedroom with peeling paint and a yard he kept meaning to mow. He sat in the truck for a minute, hands still gripping the wheel, trying to shake the image of her face, the blood, the stillness, the way her body had felt like something already halfway gone. Then he heard the front door open. "Dad?" His son stood on the porch in his pajamas, skinny arms wrapped around himself against the cold. 8 years old, all elbows and bedhead, with his mother's dark eyes and Dylan's stubborn jaw. He looked worried. Dylan climbed out of the truck, forcing his voice steady. "Hey, buddy, what are you doing up?" "You weren't here." "I know, I'm sorry. There was an accident on the road. I had to help." His son's eyes dropped to Dylan's hands, and Dylan realized too late that there was still blood under his nails. He shoved them into his pockets. "Is the person okay?" "I don't know," Dylan said honestly, "but the ambulance got there. They're at the hospital now." His son nodded slowly, processing this, then looked back up. "Are you okay?" And that question, simple and earnest and so much like something his mother would have asked, hit Dylan harder than he expected. He crossed the yard and pulled his son into a hug, feeling the small body relax against him. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm okay." They went inside together. Dylan made breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, nothing fancy, while his son sat at the kitchen table with his sketchbook, drawing something Dylan couldn't see from this angle. The radio hummed low in the background, local news cycling through weather and traffic, and a high school football score that didn't matter. Normal, routine. The kind of morning Dylan had built his life around since his wife died 3 years ago. He didn't think about the woman in the wreck. He didn't let himself. The call came 2 days later. Dylan was under a Chevy Silverado, wrestling with a rusted-out muffler, when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. Whoever it was could wait, but it buzzed again. And again. On the fourth buzz, he swore, slid out from under the truck, and wiped his hands on his coveralls. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something, instinct, curiosity, the faint memory of fog and blood, made him pick up. "Yeah?" "Is this Dylan Carter?" A woman's voice, crisp and professional. "Who's asking?" "My name is Rebecca Lowe. I'm calling from St. Catherine's Hospital. I'm trying to reach the man who assisted a patient 2 nights ago on Route 12. The paramedics said you stayed until they arrived." Dylan's grip tightened on the phone. "Is she okay?" A pause. "She's stable. Critical, but stable. She's asking for you." "Me? She doesn't even know me." "Apparently she wants to thank you." Another pause, softer this time. "She's very insistent." Dylan exhaled, staring at the oil stains on his hands. "Look, I appreciate the call, but I didn't do anything special. I just happened to be there." "Mr. Carter, you saved her life." "The paramedics saved her life. I just pulled her out of a car." "Which is why she's alive to insist on meeting you." Rebecca's voice carried a faint smile now. "I'm not supposed to tell you this, but she's threatened to check herself out if we don't at least pass along the message. So, message passed. What you do with it is up to you." Dylan ran a hand through his hair, leaving a streak of grease across his forehead. He thought about the woman, her pale face, the way her breath had rattled in her chest, the blood on his jacket he still hadn't washed. He thought about his son, about the garage, about the small and simple life he'd built that didn't have room for complications. "Tell her I'm glad she's okay," he said finally. "But I'm not looking for thanks. I'll pass it along." The line went dead. Dylan shoved the phone back in his pocket and slid back under the Silverado, but the wrench felt heavier in his hands now. He worked through the rest of the afternoon in silence, finished the muffler, moved on to an oil change and a brake job, and tried not to think about the woman who wanted to thank a man she'd never met. He failed. 3 weeks passed. Dylan fell back into rhythm. Morning drop-off at school, 8 hours at the garage, evening pickup, homework, dinner, bedtime. His son started a new project, sketching birds from the field guide Dylan had bought him at the library sale, and filled page after page with careful pencil lines. Robins, blue jays, a cardinal with wings spread wide. Dylan hung them on the fridge with magnets shaped like tools, each one a small bright spot in the kitchen's dim light. Work was steady. Not great, but steady. Millhaven wasn't big enough to keep the garage packed, but it was small enough that people came back, trusted him, paid in cash when the bank accounts ran low. Dylan fixed what broke. He didn't ask questions. He didn't get involved. Then, on a gray Saturday afternoon, a car pulled into the lot. It was a BMW, sleek and black, and completely out of place among the pickup trucks and hand-me-down sedans that usually rolled through. Dylan was finishing up a tire rotation on a Ford Ranger, and he barely glanced up as the BMW's door opened and a woman stepped out. She was tall, early 30s maybe, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and clothes that looked expensive in a way Dylan couldn't quite name. Fitted jeans, leather jacket, boots that had never seen a dirt road. She stood by the car for a second, looking around like she wasn't sure she was in the right place, then crossed the lot toward him. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Dylan Carter?" He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "Depends who's asking. I'm sorry to just show up like this." She smiled, and it was warm, a little nervous. "My name is Elena. My car's been making a weird noise, and someone in town said you were the best mechanic around." Dylan looked past her at the BMW. It was pristine. No dents, no rust, no visible wear. "What kind of noise?" "Sort of a rattling when I accelerate. Could be a heat shield, could be the exhaust. Hard to say without looking." "Could you look?" He hesitated. Something about her felt off, though he couldn't say what. Maybe it was the way she held herself, too careful, like she was playing a part. Maybe it was the car, too clean for someone who'd been driving long enough to develop car trouble. Or maybe it was just Dylan's instinct, honed by years of people lying about why their check engine light was on. But she was a customer, and he needed the work. "Pull it into the bay," he said. She did. Dylan popped the hood, leaned in, and started checking the obvious stuff. Bolts, clamps, anything that might have come loose. He didn't find anything wrong. The engine was clean, well-maintained, newer than most of the cars he worked on. He started it up, listened, heard nothing that sounded like a rattle. "When did you say it started?" "A few days ago." She was standing close now, watching him work. "It's probably nothing. I might just be paranoid." "Everything sounds fine to me," Dylan said, shutting the hood. "But if it happens again, bring it back and I'll take a closer look." "Thank you." She pulled out her wallet. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing. I didn't do anything." "You looked. That's something." "It's 10 minutes. Don't worry about it." She hesitated, then put the wallet away. "You're very kind." Dylan shrugged. "Just doing my job." She smiled again, and this time it looked real. "Well, thank you anyway. I'm new to town, and it's nice to know there are still good people around." "Where'd you move from?" "Chicago. Needed a change of pace." "Millhaven's definitely slower." "That's what I'm hoping for." She left after that, driving away in her perfect car, and Dylan went back to work. But her face stuck with him. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because something about her felt familiar in a way he couldn't place, like a song he'd heard once and couldn't remember the words to. He didn't think about it too hard. He should have. Elena came back the following weekend. This time, she brought coffee. 2 cups from the diner on Main Street, and she handed one to Dylan with an apologetic smile. "I know you said it was nothing," she said, "but I wanted to say thank you properly. You didn't have to help me." Dylan took the coffee, caught off guard. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to." They stood there for a moment, awkward and uncertain, until Dylan gestured to the bench outside the garage. "You want to sit?" "Sure." They sat, drank coffee, talked about nothing. Millhaven, the weather, the diner's questionable pie selection. Elena asked questions, easy ones, and Dylan answered without thinking. Where he grew up, how long he'd owned the garage, whether he liked it here. "Most days," he said honestly. "It's quiet, simple, good for raising a kid." "You have a son." "Yeah, he's 8. "What's he like?" Dylan smiled despite himself. "Smart, quiet, draws all the time, birds mostly. He's got this whole notebook full of them." "That's beautiful." He got it from his mom. She used to paint. Elena's expression shifted, something soft and sad crossing her face. Used to? She died 3 years ago. I'm sorry. Dylan nodded, staring into his coffee. He didn't talk about his wife often. Didn't see the point. She was gone, and grief was just something you carried, like a weight that never got lighter, only more familiar. But there was something about the way Elena said it, simple, no pity, just acknowledgement, that made it easier. What about you? He asked, changing the subject. What brought you to Millhaven? Honestly, I needed to disappear for a while. She laughed, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I was working a job that ate my whole life. No time, no space, just work and more work. I woke up one day and realized I didn't recognize myself anymore. So you just left? More or less. That takes guts. Or stupidity. She smiled. I'm still deciding which. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence, and when Elena stood to leave, she paused. Would it be okay if I came back sometime? Just to talk. I don't know many people here yet, and you seem real. Dylan didn't know what to say to that. Part of him wanted to say no, to keep his life as small and contained as he'd made it. But another part, the part that still remembered what it felt like to talk to someone who wasn't 8 years old or asking about brake pads, made him nod. Yeah, he said, that'd be okay. Elena smiled, and this time it was bright and genuine. Good. I'll see you around, Dylan. She left, and Dylan watched her go, wondering what he'd just agreed to. Over the next few weeks, Elena became a regular. She'd stop by the garage on weekends, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with lunch from the diner, sometimes with nothing but conversation. She didn't ask for much, didn't pry. Just sat on the bench or leaned against the wall and talked while Dylan worked. She told him about Chicago, the noise, the pace, the pressure, and he told her about Millhaven, about the garage, about the small joys of fixing things that stayed fixed. His son met her on a Sunday afternoon. Dylan had brought him to the garage to help clean up, and when Elena arrived, the boy was sitting on the floor with his sketchbook, drawing a hawk he'd seen that morning. She crouched down beside him, genuinely interested, and asked about the drawing. He showed her, shy at first, then warming up as she asked questions about the details, the feathers, the talons, the way he'd shaded the wings. You're really talented, she said, and the boy blushed. He gets that a lot, Dylan said, smiling. Does he show his work? Just to me. Elena looked at the boy, then back at Dylan. You should be proud. I am. After that, she started asking about him more, how he was doing in school, whether he had friends, what he liked to draw. Dylan found himself answering easily, talking about his son in ways he hadn't with anyone since his wife died. Felt strange. Good, but strange. One Saturday, Elena brought art supplies, a new sketchbook, a set of colored pencils, a book on bird anatomy. She handed them to the boy with a casual smile. I saw these and thought of you. The boy's eyes went wide. For me? If you want them. He looked at Dylan, who nodded, and then he hugged the sketchbook to his chest like it was the most valuable thing in the world. Thank you, he said quietly. You're welcome. Dylan walked Elena to her car that afternoon, feeling something shift in his chest. You didn't have to do that, he said. I know, but I wanted to. She paused, hand on the car door. He's a sweet kid, Dylan. You're doing a great job. I'm just trying not to screw it up. You're not. She left, and Dylan stood in the lot, watching her taillights disappear, feeling the edges of his carefully controlled life start to blur. By the time spring rolled into summer, Elena had become part of their routine. She joined them for Sunday dinners. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti or grilled chicken, eaten at the kitchen table with his son chattering about school and birds and whatever new drawing he was working on. She'd help with dishes. She'd sit on the porch with Dylan after the boy went to bed, talking in low voices while the cicadas hummed and the sky turned dark. Dylan didn't know when it happened, but somewhere along the way, he started looking forward to seeing her. Not because she was beautiful, though she was. Not because she was easy to talk to, though she was that too. But because she made him feel like a person again. Not just a father, not just a mechanic. A person with thoughts and feelings and a life that extended beyond the edges of his son's needs. She asked about his wife once, late on a night when the wine had loosened his tongue. What was she like? Dylan leaned back in his chair, staring at the stars. Strong, stubborn. She could make you laugh even when you wanted to stay mad. She loved color. Everything had to be bright, you know? Our bedroom was yellow, said it reminded her of sunlight. She sounds wonderful. She was. He swallowed, the familiar ache settling in his chest. Cancer took her fast. 6 months from diagnosis to gone. I still don't know how to explain that to him. Elena reached across the space between their chairs and touched his hand. Just a light touch, barely there, but it grounded him. You don't have to explain it, she said softly. You just have to be there. And you are. Dylan looked at her, really looked, and saw something in her eyes that made his breath catch. Sadness, maybe. Or understanding. Or something deeper he wasn't ready to name. Thank you, he said. For what? For being here. She smiled, but it was small, almost fragile. Where else would I be? They sat in silence after that, hands still touching, and Dylan let himself believe, just for a moment, that this could be real. The first crack appeared in August. Elena's phone rang during dinner, a sharp buzz that cut through the boy's story about a blue heron he'd seen at the creek. She glanced at the screen, and something in her expression changed, hardened just for a second, before she silenced it. Sorry, she said, slipping it into her pocket. Work thing. I thought you left work, Dylan said lightly. I did, but they still call sometimes. What kind of work? She hesitated, just a beat too long. Consulting. Boring corporate stuff, nothing exciting. Dylan let it drop, but the moment stuck with him. The way she'd looked at the phone, the way her voice had gone carefully neutral, the way she'd shifted the conversation back to his son without missing a beat. He told himself he was reading too much into it, but doubt, once planted, has a way of growing. The second crack came a week later. Dylan and his son were at the hardware store, picking up paint for the garage, when the boy tugged on his sleeve. Dad, isn't that Elena? Dylan looked up. Across the parking lot, standing beside a black SUV with tinted windows, was Elena, except she didn't look like Elena. Her hair was down, sleek and professional. She wore a suit, tailored and sharp, and she was talking to a man in a similar suit, her posture stiff, her expression all business. Dylan's chest tightened. Before he could say anything, she saw them. Her eyes went wide just for a second, and then she was smiling, waving, walking over with that same easy warmth she always wore. Hey, what are you guys doing here? Getting paint, the boy said. What are you doing? Meeting an old colleague, just tying up loose ends from Chicago. You look different, the boy said, honest and blunt in the way only kids can be. Elena laughed, but it sounded forced. Yeah, I clean up okay when I have to. Dylan didn't say anything, just watched her, trying to reconcile the woman in front of him, polished, poised, powerful, with the woman who sat on his porch in jeans and drank cheap beer. The woman who said she'd left corporate life behind. Well, Elena said, glancing back at the SUV, I should get going. See you this weekend? Yeah, Dylan said slowly. See you. She left, and the boy looked up at him. She looks like a businesswoman. Yeah, Dylan said. She does. They finished shopping in silence, and Dylan tried to ignore the unease curling in his gut. The truth came crashing down on a Friday night in late September. Elena was at the house, helping the boy with a colored pencil drawing of a barn owl, when her phone rang again. This time, she didn't silence it. She stepped into the hallway, and Dylan, carrying dishes to the sink, heard her voice through the thin walls. I told you, I need more time. No, I'm handling it. You don't understand, this is different, because he doesn't know who I am, and if he finds out... Dylan froze, water running over his hands, heart pounding in his ears. I'll figure it out. Just give me another month. Yes, I know what's at stake. Vanessa Hale doesn't make excuses. She makes results. I get it, but this isn't... The water shut off. The room went silent. Dylan stood there, staring at the wall, the name echoing in his head like a punch. Vanessa Hale. Not Elena. Vanessa Hale. CEO of Hale Industries. Billionaire. The woman he'd pulled from a burning wreck 2 years ago. The woman whose face had been all over the news for weeks after the accident, whose recovery had been called a miracle. The woman who'd been lying to him this entire time. Elena, Vanessa, stepped back into the kitchen, and the moment she saw his face, she stopped. "Dylan, who are you?" Her expression crumbled. "Let me explain. Who the hell are you?" She opened her mouth, closed it, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked lost. "My name is Vanessa," she said quietly. "Vanessa Hale. And I'm sorry." Dylan's hands clenched into fists. "You're sorry?" "Yes. You lied to me. You lied to my son. You've been lying for months. I didn't mean for it to go this far." "Then why did it?" His voice cracked, raw and furious. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" "Because I didn't know how." Vanessa's voice rose, desperate. "I came here to thank you, Dylan. That's all I wanted. But when I saw you, when I saw your life, your son, the way you lived, I wanted to be part of it. I wanted to be someone normal, someone real. So you made yourself into someone fake. No. Dylan, everything I felt, everything I feel is real. I swear. Get out." Vanessa flinched. "Dylan, get out of my house." She looked at him, eyes shining, and then at the boy, who stood in the doorway with his sketchbook clutched to his chest, confusion written all over his small face. "I'm sorry," Vanessa whispered. Then she left. Dylan stood in the kitchen, breathing hard, the sound of the door closing echoing through the empty house. His son walked over slowly, and Dylan pulled him into a hug, holding on tight, trying to keep the pieces of their world from falling apart. But he could already feel them slipping through his fingers. The house felt smaller after she left. Dylan stood in the kitchen, his son pressed against his side, and listened to the silence stretch out like a wound that wouldn't close. The dishes were still in the sink. The boy's sketchbook lay open on the table, the barn owl half finished, colored pencils scattered across the wood. Everything looked the same as it had 10 minutes ago, but nothing was. "Dad?" His son's voice was small, muffled against Dylan's ribs. "Why did Elena leave?" Dylan closed his eyes. "Her name's not Elena." "What?" "It's Vanessa. She lied about who she was." The boy pulled back, looking up at him with those dark eyes that saw too much. "Why would she lie?" "I don't know, buddy." "Is she coming back?" Dylan's throat tightened. "No." "But she's not coming back." His son's face crumpled, and Dylan felt something break inside his chest. The boy had already lost his mother. He didn't deserve to lose someone else he'd let himself trust. But Dylan didn't know how to fix this. Didn't know how to explain that sometimes people lied, that sometimes the people you thought you knew turned out to be strangers, that sometimes love wasn't enough to make someone real. So he just held him. Let the kid cry into his shirt while the kitchen lights buzzed overhead and the night pressed in through the windows. Later, after his son had finally fallen asleep, Dylan sat on the porch with a beer he didn't drink and stared at the empty street. His phone was in his pocket, silent and heavy, and he kept thinking about all the times Vanessa, Elena, whoever she was, had sat in this exact spot, laughing, talking, letting him believe she was just a woman who'd moved to Mill Haven for a fresh start. He wanted to be angry. He was angry. But underneath the anger was something worse, a hollow ache that felt too much like grief. His phone buzzed. Dylan pulled it out, half expecting a text from her, some explanation or apology or plea, but it was just a notification, a news alert. Vanessa Hale, CEO of Hale Industries, spotted in rural Illinois. Sources say she's been laying low after last year's accident. There was a photo. Vanessa in a sleek black dress at some gala, smiling for the cameras, looking nothing like the woman who'd brought his son art supplies and sat on his couch in bare feet. Dylan stared at it until the screen went dark, then shoved the phone back in his pocket and went inside. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Dylan's son didn't want breakfast. He sat at the table with his sketchbook closed in front of him, staring at nothing, and Dylan didn't push. He made eggs anyway, set a plate in front of the boy, and watched him pick at it with a fork. "You want to talk about it?" Dylan asked. "No?" "Okay." They sat in silence. Outside, a cardinal landed on the porch rail, bright red against the gray morning, and the boy glanced at it with empty eyes. Normally, he'd have grabbed his pencils, started sketching, narrated every detail about the bird's plumage and posture. Today, he just looked away. Dylan cleared his throat. We could go to the creek later, see if that heron's still around. I don't want to. You sure? The boy nodded. Dylan didn't argue. He finished his coffee, did the dishes, and tried to figure out what the hell he was supposed to do now. His son had built a connection with Vanessa, trusted her, liked her, maybe even loved her in the uncomplicated way kids loved the adults who paid attention to them. And now she was gone, and Dylan didn't have the first clue how to fill that space. He thought about calling someone, his sister maybe, or one of the guys from the garage. But what would he even say? That he'd let a stranger into their lives? That he'd been stupid enough to believe her lies? So he didn't call anyone. He just let the day stretch out, quiet and heavy, and tried not to think about the way Vanessa had looked at him when she said, "Everything I feel is real." By Monday, Dylan had made a decision. He couldn't stay in Millhaven, not with Vanessa's ghost in every corner of the house, in the garage, in the diner where she'd bought him coffee. Not with the risk that she'd come back, try to explain, make everything worse. His son needed a fresh start. Hell, Dylan needed one too. So he started making calls. There was a town 2 hours south, Cedarbrook, that had been looking for a mechanic for months. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough. The owner, a guy named Frank, who Dylan had met at a trade show years ago, said he could start whenever he was ready. "You sure about this?" Frank asked over the phone. "Millhaven's your home." "Not anymore," Dylan said. "Something happened?" "Yeah, something happened." Frank didn't push. Just told Dylan to come by whenever he wanted to look at the shop, and they'd work out the details. Dylan hung up and stared at the kitchen wall. The sketches were still there, taped up with magnets, bright and hopeful and wrong. He thought about taking them down, packing them away, starting over somewhere his son wouldn't have to see reminders of the woman who'd walked out. But when he reached for the first one, a robin with its wings mid-flight, his hand stopped. His son appeared in the doorway, watching him. "Are we leaving?" the boy asked quietly. Dylan dropped his hand. "Yeah, buddy, we're leaving." "Because of her?" "Because we need something new." The boy looked at the sketches, then back at Dylan. "Can I bring them?" Dylan's chest tightened. "Of course you can." "Okay." The kid turned and walked back to his room, and Dylan stood there alone, hating himself a little for not being able to protect his son from this. From any of it. "Tapatin?" Vanessa called 3 days later. Dylan was in the garage boxing up tools and parts when his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but he answered anyway. "Dylan?" Her voice was raw, like she'd been crying. "Please don't hang up." He should have. He knew he should have. But something in her tone, desperation maybe, or regret, made him stay on the line. "What do you want?" he said flatly. "To explain, to apologize, to—" "I don't want your apology." "Dylan, please. You lied to me. You lied to my son. You made him care about you, and then you disappeared. What the hell do you want me to say to that?" Silence. Then softly, "I know I screwed up." "Yeah, you did." "I never meant to hurt him, or you. I just—" Her voice cracked. "I didn't know how to tell you the truth. I thought if you knew who I was, you'd see me differently. You'd treat me like everyone else does." "Like a liar? Like a CEO?" She exhaled, shaky. "Do you know what it's like to have people see a title instead of a person? To never know if someone likes you or what you can do for them? When I met you, you didn't know who I was. You just saw me. And I wanted to hold on to that for as long as I could." Dylan leaned against the workbench, gripping the phone too hard. "So you thought lying was the answer. I thought it would buy me time. I thought I'd figure out how to tell you. But the longer I waited, the harder it got. And then I couldn't. I was a coward. You were selfish." "Yes." Her voice broke completely. "I was selfish. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Dylan closed his eyes, and for a second he let himself remember. The way she'd laughed at his son's terrible jokes, the way she'd looked at him on the porch, hand touching his, like he was worth something, the way she'd made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he could have something good again. But it had all been built on a lie. "I'm leaving Millhaven," he said. "What?" "I'm selling the garage, moving to Cedarbrook. I can't stay here." "Dylan, you don't have to—" Yeah, I do. My son lost his mom. I'm not letting him lose himself trying to make sense of you. Vanessa made a sound that might have been a sob. Can I see him? Just once, to say goodbye. No. Please, I need him to know I didn't mean to hurt him. He's 8 years old. He doesn't care about your intentions. He just knows you're gone. Dylan, don't call again. He hung up. The phone buzzed immediately. Another call, same number. But Dylan silenced it and shoved it in his pocket. His hands were shaking. He stood there in the garage, surrounded by half-empty boxes and the smell of oil and metal, and tried to breathe through the anger and the grief and the part of him that still wanted to believe her. He didn't pick up when she called again, or the next time, or the time after that. The sale went through faster than Dylan expected. The garage had been appraised, listed, and bought by a guy from 2 towns over who wanted to expand his business. The house sold to a young couple who were just starting out, full of hope and plans that made Dylan feel 100 years old. He packed everything that mattered, his tools, his son's drawings, the photos of his wife, and left the rest behind. On their last night in Millhaven, Dylan sat on the porch one final time. His son was inside, asleep, the new sketchbook Vanessa had given him tucked under his pillow. Dylan had tried to throw it out twice, but the boy had fished it out of the trash both times, clutching it like a lifeline. So Dylan let him keep it. Let him hold on to the one piece of her that wasn't poisoned by lies. The street was quiet. A dog barked in the distance. The stars were out, scattered across the sky like broken glass. Dylan's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, expecting another missed call from Vanessa. But it was a text, from a number he didn't recognize. I know you told me not to call. I'm respecting that. But I need you to know something. You saved my life, Dylan. On that road 2 years ago, you didn't have to stop. You didn't have to pull me out. You didn't have to care. But you did. And even though I ruined everything between us, I will never stop being grateful for that. I hope you and your son find the peace you deserve. I'm sorry I couldn't give it to you. Dylan read it twice. Then he deleted it, shoved the phone back in his pocket, and went inside. Cedarbrook was smaller than Millhaven. The garage was a squat cinder block building on the edge of town, with 2 bays and a gravel lot that turned to mud when it rained. The apartment above it was cramped. 1 bedroom for his son, a couch that pulled out into a bed for Dylan, a kitchen the size of a closet. But it was clean, and it was theirs, and it didn't have memories clinging to the walls. Dylan threw himself into work. He opened early, stayed late, took every job that came through the door. Oil changes, brake jobs, transmission rebuilds. He didn't care. The work kept his hands busy and his mind quiet, and that was enough. His son started at a new school, a small brick building with a playground out front and a teacher who seemed kind. The boy didn't talk much about it. Didn't talk much about anything, really. He drew in his sketchbook during recess, sat by himself at lunch, came home with blank eyes and one-word answers to Dylan's questions. Dylan told himself it would get better. It didn't. 3 months into their new life, Dylan got a call from the school. The principal's voice was calm but firm. There'd been an incident. His son had gotten into a fight with another kid, shoved him hard enough to knock him down, and they needed Dylan to come in. Dylan left the garage immediately, his chest tight with worry. When he got to the school, his son was sitting outside the principal's office, arms crossed, jaw set in that stubborn way that reminded Dylan so much of himself. There was a scrape on his knuckles. "What happened?" Dylan asked, crouching down. The boy didn't answer. The principal came out, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, and gestured for Dylan to step into her office. They talked in low voices. The other kid had called his son a liar, said his drawings were fake, that nobody could draw that good. Dylan's son had told him to shut up. The kid had laughed, and then Dylan's son had shoved him. "I understand he's been through a lot," the principal said gently. "Losing his mother, moving to a new town, but we can't have him lashing out at other students." "I know," Dylan said. "I'll talk to him. I think it might help if he spoke to someone. A counselor, maybe. Someone who can help him process what he's feeling." Dylan nodded, but the knot in his stomach tightened. His son didn't need a counselor. He needed stability. He needed his mom. He needed things to stop changing long enough for him to catch his breath. But Dylan couldn't give him any of that. So he just took the boy home, made him dinner, and sat him down at the table. "You want to tell me what's going on?" Dylan asked. The boy stared at his plate. "He said I was lying." "About your drawings?" "Yeah." "And that made you mad?" "Yeah." Dylan exhaled. "Buddy, people are going to say a lot of things. Some of it's true, some of it's not. But you can't go around shoving people every time they say something you don't like." "Why not?" "Because it doesn't fix anything. It just makes things worse." The boy's face twisted, and for the first time in months, Dylan saw real emotion break through. Anger, hurt, grief. "Everything's already worse," the boy said, his voice shaking. "Mom's dead. We left home. Elena, Vanessa, she lied, and now she's gone too. And you keep acting like it's fine, but it's not fine." Dylan's throat closed up. "I know it's not fine." "Then why do you keep pretending?" "Because I don't know what else to do." Dylan's voice cracked, raw and honest. "I'm trying, okay? I'm trying to give you a good life. I'm trying to keep things normal, but I don't have all the answers." The boy looked at him, eyes shining. "I miss her." Dylan's heart broke. I know she lied, but I still miss her." "Yeah," Dylan said quietly. "Me too." They sat in silence after that, and Dylan realized he'd been doing exactly what he'd accused Vanessa of, hiding the truth, pretending everything was okay when it wasn't, trying to protect his son by keeping him in the dark. But his son didn't need protection. He needed honesty. "Listen," Dylan said. "I don't know if things are going to get better. I don't know if this town's going to feel like home, or if you're going to make friends, or if you're ever going to stop missing her. But I promise you, I'm not going to lie to you. Not about the hard stuff. Not about anything. Okay?" The boy nodded slowly. "And if you want to talk about her, about Vanessa, you can. I won't get mad." "Really? Really?" The boy wiped his eyes. "Do you think she misses us?" Dylan thought about the text, the calls, the desperate edge in Vanessa's voice when she'd begged to see him one last time. "Yeah," he said. "I think she does." "Then why doesn't she come find us?" "Because I told her not to." The boy looked at him, confused. "Why?" "Because I was angry and hurt, and I didn't want her messing up our lives any more than she already had." "But what if she's sorry?" Dylan's chest tightened. "Being sorry doesn't always fix things." "Maybe not, but it's something." Dylan stared at his son, this small, smart, impossibly perceptive kid, and felt something shift. He'd been so focused on protecting him, on keeping Vanessa out, that he hadn't stopped to think about what his son actually needed. And maybe what he needed wasn't distance. Maybe it was closure. That night, after his son went to bed, Dylan pulled out his phone. He scrolled through the blocked numbers, found Vanessa's, and stared at it for a long time. His finger hovered over the call button. He could unblock her, hear her voice, maybe even let her explain. But what would that accomplish? She'd lied. She'd broken their trust. And no amount of apologies or explanations would change that. So he put the phone down and went to bed. But sleep didn't come easy. A week later, Dylan's son came home from school with a permission slip. "There's a field trip," the boy said, handing it over. "To the art museum in the city. Can I go?" Dylan looked at the paper. It was a 3-hour drive, a full-day event, and it cost $30 he didn't really have to spare. But his son's eyes were bright for the first time in months, and Dylan couldn't say no to that. "Yeah," he said. "You can go." The boy smiled, small but real, and Dylan felt a flicker of hope. The day of the field trip, Dylan worked straight through lunch. He had a clutch replacement that was taking longer than expected, and by the time he finished, his back was screaming and his hands were covered in grease. He cleaned up, checked his phone, and saw a missed call from the school. His stomach dropped. He called back immediately. "Mr. Carter?" The teacher's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "Everything's fine. Your son is fine, but he had a bit of a spell at the museum." "A spell?" "He got dizzy, said his chest felt tight. We had him sit down, gave him some water, and he's okay now. But I wanted to let you know." Dylan's pulse hammered. "Is he still dizzy?" No, he says he feels fine, but if it happens again, you might want to have him checked out. Yeah, okay, thanks. He hung up and stared at the phone, worry gnawing at his gut. His son had never had dizzy spells before, never complained about his chest. It was probably nothing, stress maybe, or just the heat, but Dylan made a mental note to schedule a doctor's appointment anyway, just to be safe. 2 weeks later, it happened again. Dylan's son woke up in the middle of the night, gasping for air, clutching his chest like something was squeezing it from the inside. Dylan carried him to the truck, drove 20 miles to the nearest emergency room, and sat in a plastic chair while doctors ran tests and asked questions he didn't have answers to. They kept the boy overnight for observation, said his heart rate was irregular, said they wanted to run more tests. Dylan didn't sleep. He sat by his son's bed, watching the monitors beep and flash, and felt the world tilt sideways. His wife had gotten sick fast. One day she was fine. The next she was in the hospital with a diagnosis that came with an expiration date. Dylan had promised himself he'd never let that happen again, that he'd protect his son from everything, but he couldn't protect him from this. The next morning, the cardiologist came in, a soft-spoken man with graying hair and a clipboard full of bad news. "We've run a full workup," he said, sitting down across from Dylan. "Your son has a congenital heart defect. It's something he was born with, but it's been asymptomatic until now. The episodes he's been having, the dizziness, the chest tightness, are the heart struggling to compensate." Dylan's mouth went dry. "What does that mean?" "It means he needs surgery. Soon." "How soon?" "Within the next 2 months. Ideally sooner." Dylan felt the floor drop out from under him. "And if he doesn't get it?" The cardiologist's expression didn't change, but his eyes said everything. "The condition is progressive. Without intervention, it will get worse." Dylan looked at his son, who was sleeping now, small and fragile against the white hospital sheets. He thought about his wife, about the bills that had buried them even with insurance, about the garage that was barely breaking even and the savings account that had maybe $2,000 in it. "How much does the surgery cost?" he asked. The cardiologist hesitated. "With insurance, you're looking at around 60 to 80,000 out of pocket. Without insurance, I have insurance." "Then that's the range. We can set up a payment plan, and there are programs that might help." Dylan stopped listening. $60 to $80,000. He didn't have $60, let alone 60,000. He didn't have anything. Mount. Over the next few days, Dylan called everyone he could think of. The insurance company, who told him the surgery was covered, but the deductible and copays would still run him 70 grand. The hospital's financial aid office, who said he made too much to qualify for assistance. A medical loan company who denied him based on his credit. His sister, who sent him $500 and an apology that she couldn't do more. He applied for every program, every grant, every charity fund he could find online. Most didn't respond. The ones that did said he didn't qualify. Dylan sat at the kitchen table with a pile of rejection letters and a calculator that kept spitting out the same impossible number, and he wanted to scream, wanted to punch the wall, wanted to do something, anything, that would make this better. But there was nothing. His son needed surgery, and Dylan couldn't pay for it. On a cold night in early November, Dylan sat on the apartment steps with a beer he wasn't drinking and stared at his phone. He'd been avoiding this for weeks, told himself he didn't need her help, told himself he'd figure it out on his own. But he was out of options. His son was getting worse. The episodes were coming more frequently now, twice in the past week, and the cardiologist had moved the surgery timeline up. They had a month, maybe less. Dylan pulled up Vanessa's contact, still blocked, and stared at it. He could unblock her, call her, ask for help. She had money. More money than Dylan could even comprehend. $70,000 was probably pocket change to her, but asking her would mean admitting he'd failed. It would mean letting her back into their lives. It would mean giving her power over them again. And Dylan didn't know if he could do that. His phone buzzed. A text from the school. His son had another episode during gym class. They were calling an ambulance. Dylan didn't think. He just unblocked Vanessa's number and hit call. She answered on the first ring. "Dylan?" Her voice cracked his chest wide open. "I need your help," he said. Vanessa was in a board meeting when Dylan's name lit up her phone. She'd kept his contact saved, even after he'd blocked her, even after months of silence, even after she'd convinced herself she'd never hear from him again. The phone sat face up on the conference table, vibrating against the polished wood, and everyone in the room turned to look. "Excuse me," Vanessa said, standing so fast her chair scraped. "I need to take this." She didn't wait for permission, just grabbed the phone and walked out, heels clicking on marble, heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. "Dylan? I need your help." His voice was wrecked, hollow, and wrong in every way that mattered. Vanessa stopped in the middle of the hallway. "What happened?" "My son. He's sick. Heart condition. He needs surgery, and I can't—" Dylan's voice broke. "I can't afford it." The world narrowed to the sound of his breathing on the other end of the line. "Where are you?" Vanessa asked. "Cedarbrook Memorial Hospital. They're bringing him in now." "I'm on my way." "Vanessa, I'm on my way," she said again, and hung up before he could argue. She made 3 calls on her way to the elevator, her assistant to clear her schedule for the next week, her driver to bring the car around, her private physician to get the name of the best pediatric cardiac surgeon in the state. By the time she reached the lobby, she had a plan. By the time she got in the car, she had a team assembled. And by the time the driver pulled onto the highway, she'd already made the decision that would either save Dylan's son or destroy whatever was left between them. The hospital was small, outdated, with flickering fluorescent lights and linoleum floors that stuck to Vanessa's heels as she walked through the emergency room doors. She scanned the waiting area and found Dylan immediately. He was sitting in a plastic chair, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His work boots were scuffed, his jeans streaked with grease, and when he looked up and saw her, the expression on his face was something between relief and agony. Vanessa crossed the room and sat down beside him. "Where is he?" she asked quietly. "They took him back 20 minutes ago. Another episode. Worse this time." Dylan scrubbed a hand over his face. "They said his heart's failing, that if we don't do the surgery soon, he's going to—" He stopped, couldn't finish the sentence. "What did the doctor say?" "Same thing they've been saying. He needs surgery, valve replacement or repair, I don't know. They used a lot of words I didn't understand. But the bottom line is it costs $70,000, and I don't have it." Vanessa reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and started typing. "What are you doing?" Dylan asked. "Calling in a favor." She didn't look up. "There's a surgeon at Northwestern Memorial in Chicago, Dr. Raymond Kepler, best pediatric cardiac surgeon in the country. He owes me." "Vanessa, he'll do the surgery, and I'll cover the cost." Dylan went still. "No." "Dylan," I said no. Vanessa finally looked at him, and the anger in his eyes was sharp enough to cut. "Your son is dying, and you're going to let pride kill him?" "This isn't about pride." "Then what is it about?" "I didn't call you so you could swoop in and save the day. I called because I thought—" He stopped, shook his head. "I don't know what I thought." "You thought I'd help," Vanessa said quietly. "And I am, whether you like it or not. I don't want your money. I don't care what you want. I care about him." Dylan stood up, pacing, hands clenched into fists. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to lie to us for months, disappear, and then show up like some kind of savior just because you have a checkbook. I'm not trying to be a savior. I'm trying to keep a little boy alive. By making me owe you." Vanessa's chest tightened. "You don't owe me anything." "Bullshit. You pay for this, and I'm in debt to you for the rest of my life. That's how this works." "That's not—" She stopped, exhaled, forced herself to stay calm. "Dylan, I'm not asking for anything in return. I just want to help." "Why?" "Because I care about him. Because I care about you. Because 2 years ago you pulled me out of a burning car and didn't ask for a single thing, and now it's my turn." Dylan looked at her, and for a moment the anger cracked, showing the fear underneath. "I can't let you do this." "You don't have a choice." "Yeah, I do. I can figure this out on my own." "How?" "You've already tried everything. Loans, grants, financial aid. You told me yourself you're out of options." "So what? I'm just supposed to let you write a check and pretend it doesn't change anything?" "It doesn't have to change anything." "It changes everything," Dylan said, his voice breaking. "Don't you get that? The second I take your money, I lose the one thing I have left. My ability to take care of my son on my own. Vanessa stood, closing the distance between them. You're not on your own. You never were. And needing help doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Easy for you to say when you've never needed anyone. You think I don't need people? Vanessa's voice sharpened. You think I don't know what it's like to feel powerless? I spent 2 months in a hospital bed after that accident, Dylan. I couldn't walk, couldn't feed myself, couldn't do anything without someone else's help. And it was hell. But you know what I learned? That letting people in doesn't make you less. It makes you more. Dylan stared at her, jaw tight, and she could see him fighting it, fighting her, fighting the truth. Please, Vanessa said quietly. Let me help. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Mr. Carter? You can see your son now. Dylan didn't answer Vanessa, just turned and followed the nurse down the hall, leaving her standing alone in the waiting room with her phone in her hand and her heart in pieces. Dylan's son looked small in the hospital bed. Too small. The IV line in his arm, the monitors beeping around him, the oxygen cannula under his nose, it all made him look fragile in a way that terrified Dylan. The boy's eyes were half closed, heavy with exhaustion, but they opened when Dylan sat down beside him. Hey, buddy, Dylan said, taking his hand. Hey. The boy's voice was thin, raspy. How you feeling? Tired. Yeah, I bet. The boy glanced past Dylan to the doorway where Vanessa stood, hesitant and uncertain. His face brightened a little. Vanessa? She stepped into the room, and Dylan saw her try to smile. Hey, kiddo. You came. Of course I came. The boy looked at Dylan, then back at her. Are you staying? If your dad says it's okay. Dylan wanted to say no. Wanted to tell her to leave, to stop complicating things, to stop making his son hope for something that couldn't last. But when he looked at the way his son's fingers tightened around his hand, the way his eyes held on to Vanessa like she was something solid in a world that kept shifting, Dylan couldn't do it. Yeah, he said quietly. She can stay. Vanessa pulled up a chair on the other side of the bed, and the three of them sat in silence while the monitors beeped and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. After a few minutes, the boy spoke. Dad said you lied about who you were. Vanessa flinched. I did. Why? She glanced at Dylan, who didn't say anything, then looked back at the boy. Because I was scared. I thought if you knew the truth, you wouldn't like me anymore. That's dumb. A surprised laugh escaped Vanessa. Yeah, it was. I still like you, the boy said. Even though you lied. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. I still like you too. Good. The boy's eyelids drooped. I'm glad you're here. Me too. Dylan watched them, something twisting in his chest, and he didn't know if it was anger or relief or something he didn't have a name for. The cardiologist came in an hour later, a different doctor this time, older, with a calm voice and a tablet full of charts Dylan couldn't read. We've stabilized him for now, the doctor said. But we can't wait much longer. His heart's compensating, but it won't hold out indefinitely. We need to schedule the surgery within the next 2 weeks. What are we looking at? Dylan asked. We'll need to do a valve replacement. It's a complex procedure, but the survival rate is good if we move quickly. The issue is that we're not equipped to handle this here. We'd need to transfer him to a facility with a specialized cardiac unit. Like where? Northwestern Memorial in Chicago would be my recommendation. They have one of the best pediatric programs in the country. Dylan's stomach sank. And the cost? The doctor hesitated. Without insurance, you're looking at close to $200,000. With insurance and a good surgeon, maybe $70,000 to $90,000 out of pocket. Dylan felt the number hit him like a punch. Vanessa spoke before he could. What if I arrange for Dr. Raymond Kepler to perform the surgery? The doctor's eyebrows went up. You know Ray Kepler? We've worked together on hospital funding initiatives. He's the best, right? One of the best in the world. Then I'll make the call. Dylan's son will be transferred to Northwestern, and Dr. Kepler will handle the surgery. All costs covered. The doctor looked at Dylan. Mr. Carter? Dylan's hands were shaking. He looked at Vanessa, at the certainty in her eyes, and he hated how much he needed this. Hated how much he needed her. Okay, he said, the word barely audible. Vanessa nodded once, then turned to the doctor. How soon can we move him? I'll make the arrangements. We can have an ambulance ready in a few hours. Good. Do it. The doctor left, and Dylan sat there, staring at the floor, trying to process what had just happened. Dylan, Vanessa said softly, don't. I'm not trying to take over. Yeah, you are. He looked up, eyes hard. That's exactly what you're doing. Because you won't let me help any other way. Because I don't want to owe you. You don't owe me, Vanessa said, leaning forward. This isn't a transaction. This is me doing the right thing because I can. And what happens after? When he's recovered and we're back in Cedarbrook and you're in Chicago running your empire? What then? Vanessa didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was quiet. I don't know. Exactly. You don't know because you're used to fixing things with money and then walking away. That's not fair, isn't it? You lied to me for months, Vanessa. You made my son love you and then you disappeared, and now you're back because you feel guilty, and you think throwing money at the problem will make it go away. But it won't. It'll just make everything more complicated. I'm not here because I feel guilty, Vanessa said, her voice rising. I'm here because I care about him, about you. And yeah, maybe I don't know what happens after. Maybe I don't have all the answers, but I'm here now, and I'm not walking away. Until you do. I won't. You already did once. Vanessa flinched like he'd hit her, and Dylan felt a sick satisfaction that he immediately regretted. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I'm sorry I lied. I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I made you think you couldn't trust me. But I'm asking you to trust me now, just this once. Let me help. Dylan looked at his son, sleeping quietly in the hospital bed, and he thought about all the times he'd promised to protect him, to give him a good life, to never let him down. And he thought about how badly he was failing. Okay, Dylan said finally, but after this, we're done. You pay for the surgery, and then you go back to your life and we go back to ours. No more visits, no more phone calls, we're done. Vanessa's face crumpled, but she nodded. Okay. I mean it. I know. Dylan stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the parking lot, trying not to think about how much it hurt to say those words. The transfer happened at midnight. Dylan rode in the ambulance with his son, while Vanessa followed in her car. The boy slept most of the way, drugged and exhausted, and Dylan held his hand and watched the highway lights blur past. By the time they reached Northwestern Memorial, it was almost 2 a.m. The hospital was massive, all glass and steel and gleaming floors, and Dylan felt out of place the moment he stepped inside. Nurses in crisp scrubs, doctors with expensive watches, families who looked like they belonged in a different world. Vanessa handled everything. She spoke to the intake staff, signed forms, made calls. Within 30 minutes, Dylan's son was in a private room on the cardiac floor with a team of specialists reviewing his charts. Dr. Kepler himself came by, a tall man in his 50s with kind eyes and steady hands, and explained the procedure in language Dylan could actually understand. We'll go in through the chest, replace the damaged valve with a mechanical one, and close him back up. Recovery takes about 6 weeks, but he should be back to normal activity after that. And the risks? Dylan asked. There are always risks with surgery, infection, bleeding, complications from anesthesia, but the success rate for this procedure is very high. I've done it hundreds of times. And you think he'll be okay? Dr. Kepler met Dylan's eyes. I think your son is strong, and I think we caught this in time. So yes, I think he'll be okay. Dylan nodded, throat too tight to speak. After Dr. Kepler left, Vanessa touched Dylan's arm. You should get some rest. I'm not leaving him. I didn't say leave, I said rest. There's a couch in the corner. Lie down for a few hours. I'm fine. I said I'm fine. Vanessa pulled her hand back and Dylan felt like an ass, but he couldn't bring himself to apologize. Couldn't bring himself to soften, because if he did, if he let his guard down for even a second, he'd break completely. So he sat in the chair beside his son's bed and stared at the monitors until his vision blurred. Vanessa stayed anyway. She didn't push, didn't argue, just sat in the corner with her laptop, answering emails and making calls. And Dylan hated how much comfort her presence brought him. The surgery was scheduled for 2 days later. Dylan spent those 48 hours in a haze of fear and exhaustion. He barely ate, barely slept, just sat with his son, talked to doctors, signed consent forms that felt like signing his life away. His son was scared. Dylan could see it in the way he clung to his sketchbook, drawing the same bird over and over, a cardinal with wings spread wide, ready to fly. He didn't talk much, just nodded when the nurses came to check his vitals, answered questions in one-word sentences, and looked at Dylan like he was waiting for reassurance Dylan didn't know how to give. "It's going to be okay," Dylan said for the 100th time. "You don't know that." "Yeah, I do. Dr. Kepler's the best, and you're strong." "What if I'm not?" Dylan's chest tightened. "You are. You've been through so much already. This is just one more thing." "Mom didn't make it." The words hit Dylan like a freight train. He sat down on the edge of the bed, taking his son's hand. "Mom was sick for a long time, buddy, and the doctors did everything they could. But your heart, it's fixable. It's not the same." "But what if—" "No what ifs," Dylan said firmly. "You're going to get through this, and I'm going to be right here when you wake up." The boy's eyes filled with tears. "Promise?" "I promise." Vanessa appeared in the doorway with a cup of coffee for Dylan and a juice box for his son. She'd been doing that for 2 days. Small gestures, quiet support, never asking for acknowledgement. Dylan took the coffee without looking at her. His son, though, brightened. "Vanessa, will you draw with me?" She smiled. "Of course." She sat on the other side of the bed, and the boy handed her a pencil. Together, they worked on the cardinal, Vanessa filling in the details while the boy directed her. More red here, sharper beak there, tail feathers longer. Dylan watched them, and for a moment the fear loosened its grip. His son laughed at something Vanessa said, a real laugh, light and unguarded, and Dylan felt something crack inside him. Because this moment, this connection, was what he'd taken away when he'd told Vanessa to leave, and it was what his son had been missing ever since. The morning of the surgery, Dylan woke up on the couch in the hospital room with a blanket he didn't remember pulling over himself. Vanessa was asleep in the chair beside his son's bed, her head tilted at an awkward angle, hair falling loose from its ponytail. She looked exhausted, vulnerable, human. Dylan stood, stretched, and walked to the window. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the Chicago skyline in shades of pink and gold. In a few hours, his son would be in surgery, and Dylan would be sitting in a waiting room, powerless, praying to anyone who might be listening. "You okay?" Vanessa's voice was soft behind him. Dylan didn't turn around. "No." "Yeah, me neither." They stood in silence for a moment, and then Vanessa spoke again. "For what it's worth, I think he's going to be fine." "You don't know that." "No, but I believe it." Dylan finally looked at her. "Why are you still here?" "Because I said I wouldn't leave. I told you to go after this was over. The surgery hasn't happened yet, so technically, it's not over." Dylan almost smiled despite himself. "You always have an answer for everything, don't you?" "It's a skill I've honed over years of corporate negotiations." This time Dylan did smile, small and fleeting. Then it faded. "I've been an ass to you." "Yes, you have." "I'm sorry." Vanessa shook her head. "You don't have to apologize. You're terrified. You're protecting your son. I get it. That doesn't make it okay." "No, but it makes it understandable." Dylan looked back out the window. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Let you in. Trust you. I want to, but every time I try, I remember what it felt like when you left, and I can't go through that again." "He can't go through that again." "I know," Vanessa said quietly. "And I don't blame you for not trusting me. I broke that. But Dylan, I'm not asking you to trust me right now. I'm just asking you to let me be here. For him. For you. No expectations, no strings." Dylan turned to face her. "And after the surgery?" "After the surgery, I'll do whatever you want. If you want me gone, I'm gone. If you want space, I'll give you space. But if you want me to stay, even just as a friend, I will." "Why?" "Because I love him," Vanessa said simply. And because I love you." The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and terrifying. Dylan's throat tightened. "You can't just say that." "Why not? It's true." "Because it makes everything harder." "I know, but I needed you to hear it." Before Dylan could respond, a nurse knocked on the door. "We're ready to take him down to pre-op." Dylan's heart lurched. He crossed to the bed where his son was already awake, eyes wide and scared. "It's time, buddy," Dylan said, trying to keep his voice steady. The boy nodded, clutching his cardinal drawing. "Can I bring this?" "Yeah, of course." They wheeled the bed out of the room, and Dylan walked beside it, holding his son's hand. Vanessa followed a few steps behind, quiet and present. In the pre-op area, the anesthesiologist explained what would happen: the mask, the counting backward, the sleep. Dylan's son listened, then looked up at him. "I'm scared," he whispered. "I know, but you're going to be okay. I'll be right here when you wake up." "What if I don't wake up?" Dylan's vision blurred. "You will, I promise." The boy looked past him to Vanessa. "Will you be here too?" Vanessa stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll be here." "Okay." They put the mask on, and the boy started counting. 10, 9, 8. His eyes fluttered. 7, 6, 5. His grip on Dylan's hand loosened. 4, 3. And then he was gone, asleep, small and still on the table. Dylan stood there, frozen, until a nurse gently guided him out of the room. In the hallway, his legs gave out. Vanessa caught him before he hit the ground, and for the first time in months, Dylan let himself fall apart. Vanessa held Dylan in the sterile hallway outside the operating room while he shook, while his breath came in ragged gasps that sounded too much like drowning. She didn't say anything, didn't try to comfort him with empty words or false promises, just held him, her arms tight around his shoulders, anchoring him to something solid while the world spun out beneath his feet. After a moment, or maybe an hour, Dylan couldn't tell, he pulled back, wiping his face with the heel of his hand. "I'm sorry," he said, voice rough. "Don't be. I can't lose him. I can't." "You won't." Dylan looked at her, and the certainty in her eyes almost broke him again. "You don't know that." "No," Vanessa admitted, "but Dr. Kepler does, and he said your son's going to be fine, so I'm choosing to believe him." "That's not how it works." "Maybe not, but it's all we've got right now." A nurse appeared in the end of the hall. "Mr. Carter? We've set up a private waiting room for you. It's more comfortable than the main area." Dylan nodded, not trusting his voice, and followed her down a series of corridors to a small room with soft lighting, cushioned chairs, and a coffee station that looked like it belonged in a hotel lobby. Everything about it screamed money, and Dylan knew without asking that Vanessa had arranged this too. He sat down heavily, and Vanessa took the chair beside him. "You want coffee?" she asked. "No." "Water?" "No, I just want him out of surgery." "I know." They sat in silence. The clock on the wall ticked forward, each second stretching longer than the last. Dylan stared at his hands, grease still under his nails from work he'd done a lifetime ago, and tried not to think about what was happening 2 floors down. The scalpel cutting into his son's chest, the hands inside his ribs, the machine breathing for him while they stopped his heart to fix it. "Tell me something," Dylan said abruptly. Vanessa looked at him. "What?" "Anything. I don't care. Just talk to me so I stop thinking." She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, what do you want to know?" "Why'd you really come to Mill Haven? And don't say it was to thank me. There's more to it than that." Vanessa leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "You're right. There is. So tell me." She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on something Dylan couldn't see. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. "After the accident, I spent 2 months in the hospital, another 4 in physical therapy. Everyone told me I was lucky to be alive, and they were right. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt—" She paused, searching for the word. "Hollow. Like something inside me had died in that car, and I just hadn't caught up yet." Dylan didn't interrupt. "I went back to work after 6 months, threw myself into it because that's what I do. That's all I've ever done. But it didn't fix anything. I'd be in meetings, making decisions that affected thousands of people, and all I could think about was the man who'd pulled me out of that wreck. The one who didn't ask for anything, Didn't want recognition or money or a favor he could cash in later. He just helped because it was the right thing to do. I didn't do anything special, Dylan said. You saved my life. And you didn't even stick around to hear someone say thank you. Vanessa smiled, but it was sad. Do you know how rare that is? In my world, everyone wants something. Every kindness comes with a price tag. But you didn't want anything from me, and I couldn't stop thinking about that. So you tracked me down. It took 1.5 years. I hired investigators, went through hospital records, interviewed paramedics. When I finally found you, I told myself I'd just show up, say thank you, and leave. But then I saw you with your son, and I saw the life you'd built, and I wanted to be part of it, not as Vanessa Hale, CEO, just as a person. So you lied. So I lied, Vanessa agreed, and it was selfish and stupid and wrong. But Dylan, those months with you and your son, they were the most real I've felt in years. Maybe ever. Dylan looked at her, really looked, and saw the truth written all over her face. The regret, the longing, the fear that he'd never forgive her. I get why you did it, he said quietly. I don't like it, but I get it. Does that mean you forgive me? Dylan exhaled. I don't know yet. That's fair. They fell back into silence. But this time it felt different, less heavy, more like two people sitting together in the dark, waiting for the light to come back on. 3 hours into the surgery, Dr. Kepler's assistant came to the waiting room. Dylan shot to his feet. Is he okay? He's doing well, the assistant said quickly. Dr. Kepler wanted me to update you. We've replaced the valve and we're closing now. Everything went smoothly, no complications. Dylan's knees nearly buckled. He's okay? He's okay. Dr. Kepler will come talk to you himself once we're finished, but he wanted you to know. Thank you, Dylan managed. The assistant left, and Dylan sank back into his chair, covering his face with his hands. Relief hit him so hard it felt like pain, sharp and overwhelming, and he couldn't tell if he was laughing or crying or both. Vanessa's hand found his shoulder. See? I told you. Dylan looked up at her, vision blurred. Yeah, you did. You okay? I will be. Once I see him. He's going to be fine, Dylan. Better than fine. I know. Dylan wiped his eyes, then surprised himself by reaching for Vanessa's hand. He squeezed it once, hard, and she squeezed back. They stayed like that until Dr. Kepler appeared an hour later, still in his scrubs, looking tired but satisfied. He did great, Kepler said, sitting down across from them. The valve replacement went exactly as planned. His heart's already pumping stronger. He'll be in recovery for a few hours, and then we'll move him to ICU for monitoring. But barring any unexpected complications, he should make a full recovery. Dylan felt something inside him unclench for the first time in weeks. When can I see him? Soon. A nurse will come get you once he's settled. Thank you, Dylan said, his voice breaking. Thank you so much, Kepler smiled. He's a tough kid. You should be proud. After Kepler left, Dylan and Vanessa sat together in the waiting room, exhausted and relieved and not quite sure what to say. The worst was over. The surgery was done. His son was going to live. But Dylan couldn't shake the feeling that everything else, the hard conversations, the decisions about what came next, was just beginning. They let Dylan see his son 2 hours later. The boy was in a small recovery room, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed, with tubes and wires coming out of him in ways that made Dylan's stomach turn. But his chest was rising and falling on its own. His color was better. And when Dylan sat down beside him and took his hand, the boy's fingers twitched in response. Hey, buddy, Dylan said softly. You made it. You're okay. The boy didn't wake, but Dylan didn't need him to. He just sat there, holding his hand, feeling the steady rhythm of his pulse, and let himself believe that things were going to be okay. Vanessa stood in the doorway, watching, and Dylan looked up at her. You want to come in? He asked. She hesitated. Are you sure? Yeah, come in. Vanessa crossed to the other side of the bed, looking down at the boy with an expression Dylan couldn't quite name. Tender, protective, like she was seeing something precious that she'd almost lost. He's going to hate the scar, she said quietly. Dylan huffed a laugh. Probably, but he'll survive. Yeah, he will. They stayed like that for a long time, standing on opposite sides of the bed, watching the boy sleep, and Dylan felt something shift between them. Not forgiveness, exactly. Not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. Imkid. Recovery was slow and messy and nothing like the movies. Dylan's son woke up the next day in pain, groggy from medication, confused about where he was and why his chest hurt so badly. The nurses were patient, explaining everything in calm voices, but the boy cried anyway. Cried because it hurt. Cried because he was scared. Cried because he wanted to go home. Dylan held him as carefully as he could, mindful of the incision and the tubes, and let him cry it out. Vanessa stayed. She brought books and puzzles and a tablet loaded with movies. She sat with the boy when Dylan needed to step out, talk to him about birds and drawing and nothing important, just filling the silence so he didn't feel alone. She didn't push, didn't try to force her way into moments that weren't hers, just existed on the edges, steady and present, until Dylan's son started asking for her when she wasn't there. "Where's Vanessa?" he'd ask, voice hoarse from the breathing tube they'd removed that morning. "She went to get food," Dylan would say, or "She's making a phone call," or "She'll be back soon." And she always was. On the third day, the boy was moved out of ICU and into a regular room. The doctors were pleased with his progress. His heart was strong. The incision was healing. He'd be able to go home in another week, maybe less. Dylan should have felt relief. Instead, he felt dread, because going home meant leaving Vanessa behind. It meant going back to Cedarbrook, back to the small apartment above the garage, back to the life they'd been building before everything fell apart. And as much as Dylan had convinced himself that was what he wanted, a clean break, no complications, he couldn't ignore the way his son's face lit up every time Vanessa walked into the room, or the way his own chest tightened when she smiled at him. On the fourth night, Dylan couldn't sleep. He'd been staying in the hospital, sleeping on the fold-out chair beside his son's bed, but tonight the boy was resting peacefully and Dylan was wide awake. He stepped out into the hallway, intending to get coffee from the nurse's station, and found Vanessa sitting in the waiting area with her laptop. "You're still here?" he asked. She looked up, startled. "I didn't want to leave in case he woke up and needed something." "Vanessa, it's almost midnight. You should go back to your hotel." "I'm fine." Dylan sat down beside her. "You've been here every day for almost a week. You have a company to run. I have people who can handle things while I'm gone." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" Dylan rubbed his face, trying to find the words. "The point is, you don't owe us this. You paid for the surgery. You got the best doctor. You've done enough." Vanessa closed her laptop, turning to face him. "Is that what you think? That I'm here out of obligation?" "I don't know what to think. I'm here because I want to be. Because I care about him. Because I care about you. And yeah, maybe part of it is guilt. But it's not just that, Dylan. It's never been just that." Dylan looked at her, at the exhaustion in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself like she was bracing for him to push her away again. "Why do you care so much?" he asked quietly. Vanessa was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Because when I was lying in that hospital bed 2 years ago, barely able to move, I kept thinking about the man who'd saved me. I didn't know your name, didn't know what you looked like, but I knew you were good. And in a world where everyone wants something, where every relationship is transactional, you were the one thing that felt pure." She paused, her voice breaking. "And then I found you, and you were even better than I'd imagined. You were kind and honest, and you loved your son so fiercely it made me ache. And I wanted that. I wanted to be part of something real for once in my life. So yeah, I lied to make it happen, and I know that was wrong. But Dylan, everything I felt, everything I still feel, is real." Dylan stared at her, and something inside him cracked wide open. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Of what?" "Of letting you in. Of letting him get attached. Of building something that's going to fall apart the second you remember you have a life waiting for you in Chicago." "What if I don't want that life anymore?" Dylan went still. "What?" Vanessa met his eyes. "What if I don't want to go back? What if I want to stay?" "You can't just walk away from your company." "Why not? I built it. I can step back from it, hand the day-to-day operations to someone else and just be on the board. I've been thinking about it for a while now, even before this." "Vanessa," I'm not asking you to make a decision right now, she said quickly. I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to know that if you want me to stay, if you're willing to give me another chance, I will. I'll move to Cedarbrook. I'll find a house. I'll be whatever you need me to be. Friend, babysitter, someone who just shows up on Sundays with coffee. I don't care. I just want to be part of your lives. Dylan couldn't breathe. You're serious? I've never been more serious about anything. You'd really leave Chicago? Leave your company? For us? In a heartbeat. Dylan looked at her, and for the first time in months, he let himself hope. The next morning, Dylan's son woke up with more energy than he'd had since the surgery. He wanted to sit up, wanted to draw, wanted to know when he could go home. The nurses helped him into a chair, brought him his sketchbook, and Dylan watched as the boy picked up a pencil with shaky hands and started working on a new drawing. Vanessa came in with breakfast, pancakes from a diner 3 blocks away because hospital food was, in the boy's words, disgusting, and his face brightened. You're back. Of course I'm back. I brought pancakes. The good kind? The kind with chocolate chips. The boy grinned and Dylan felt his heart swell. After breakfast, the boy worked on his drawing while Vanessa and Dylan sat nearby, talking quietly. The conversation was easier now, less guarded. They talked about small things, books they'd read, movies they'd seen, the ridiculousness of hospital coffee, and Dylan realized how much he'd missed this, just talking to her, being with her. Dad? His son said suddenly. Dylan looked over. Yeah, buddy. Can Vanessa come home with us? Dylan's breath caught. What? When we leave the hospital, can she come with us? To Cedarbrook? Dylan glanced at Vanessa, who was watching him carefully, and then back at his son. Why do you want her to come? The boy shrugged. Because I like her, and I don't want her to leave again. Buddy, Vanessa has her own life. Actually, Vanessa interrupted gently, I've been thinking about that. And if it's okay with your dad, I'd like to stick around for a while. Maybe find a place near you guys so I can visit. The boy's eyes went wide. Really? Really, if that's okay with you. Yes. The answer came immediately, emphatic. Yes, that's okay. Vanessa looked at Dylan, a question in her eyes. Dylan wanted to say no, wanted to protect himself and his son from the possibility of getting hurt again. But when he looked at the hope on his son's face, at the way Vanessa was looking at him like he held her entire world in his hands, he couldn't do it. Okay, Dylan said quietly. You can stick around. Vanessa's smile was bright enough to light up the entire room. Well, they brought Dylan's son home a week later. Home, as it turned out, wasn't Cedarbrook. The night before they were supposed to leave the hospital, Vanessa had pulled Dylan aside and made him an offer. She owned a house about an hour outside Chicago, a place she'd bought years ago and barely used, set on 10 acres with a pond and woods and enough space for a kid to run wild. It was closer to Northwestern in case there were any complications. It had a workshop Dylan could use as a garage, and it was empty, waiting. You don't have to decide now, Vanessa had said. But if you want a fresh start, a real one, it's there. Dylan had gone back to the apartment in Cedarbrook exactly once to pack up their things. The place had felt wrong the moment he'd walked in. Too small, too quiet, too full of memories he didn't want to carry anymore. So he'd called Vanessa and said yes. The house was everything she'd promised and more. A sprawling 2-story with big windows, hardwood floors, and a kitchen that actually had counter space. Dylan's son had his own room, huge with a window overlooking the pond, and Dylan had a workshop out back that was twice the size of his old garage. Vanessa had her own place, a cottage on the other side of the property, close enough to visit but far enough to give them space. The first few weeks were an adjustment. Dylan's son was still recovering, still taking medication, still getting tired faster than he used to. But every day he got a little stronger, a little brighter. He started drawing again, not just birds this time, but landscapes, people, scenes from his imagination. He'd sit by the pond with his sketchbook, and Vanessa would sit beside him, asking questions about his process, encouraging him in ways that made Dylan's chest ache. Dylan started working again, taking jobs from locals who needed repairs, building a reputation in this new town the same way he'd built one in Mill Haven. It was slower here, quieter, but it felt right. And Vanessa was just there, not intrusive, not demanding, just present. She'd bring dinner over a few nights a week. She'd help with homework. She'd join them for walks around the property. And slowly, carefully, Dylan let her back in. What? 3 months after the surgery, Dylan's son had his first follow-up appointment with Dr. Kepler. The news was good. The valve was functioning perfectly. The heart was strong. He was cleared for normal activity, no restrictions. He's going to be fine, Kepler said, shaking Dylan's hand. You've got a healthy kid. Dylan felt tears prick his eyes. Thank you for everything. Thank Vanessa. She's the one who made this happen. Dylan did. That night, after his son had gone to bed, Dylan walked over to Vanessa's cottage and knocked on the door. She answered in sweatpants and an oversized sweater, hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked surprised to see him. Hey, she said. Everything okay? Yeah, can I come in? Of course. He stepped inside, and for a moment he just stood there trying to find the words. I wanted to thank you, he said finally, for everything. The surgery, the house, being there for him, for us. You didn't have to do any of it, but you did. And He paused, swallowing hard. I don't know how to repay you. Vanessa shook her head. You don't need to repay me. I do, though, because you saved his life, and I don't think I ever really said that. So, thank you. She stepped closer, and Dylan could see tears in her eyes. You're welcome. They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with something Dylan didn't have a name for. Then Vanessa spoke. Can I ask you something? Yeah. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? For lying, for leaving, for all of it? Dylan looked at her, at the vulnerability in her eyes, the hope and fear all tangled together, and he realized that somewhere along the way, he already had. I think I already did, he said quietly. Vanessa's breath hitched. Really? Really? What changed? I watched you show up every single day. I watched you sit with him when he was scared. I watched you put his needs before your own. And I realized that people make mistakes, Vanessa. But what matters is what they do after. And you've done everything right. Vanessa started crying, and Dylan pulled her into his arms. I'm sorry, she whispered against his chest. I'm so sorry. I know. And it's okay. We're okay. She pulled back, looking up at him. So what happens now? Dylan smiled. I don't know. But I think we figure it out together. Vanessa smiled back, and it was the most beautiful thing Dylan had ever seen. He kissed her. It wasn't planned, wasn't calculated. It just happened. And when she kissed him back, soft and tentative and full of promise, Dylan felt something inside him finally settle. This was home. Not the house, not the town, her. They didn't tell Dylan's son right away. Not because they were hiding anything, but because Dylan wanted to be sure. Wanted to know that this thing between him and Vanessa wasn't just relief after the surgery or gratitude or some temporary fix for the loneliness they'd both been carrying. He needed to know it was real before he let his son build his world around it. So they took it slow. Vanessa came over for dinner most nights, but she went back to her cottage afterward. They talked on the porch after the boy went to bed, sitting close, but not too close, learning each other all over again, this time without the lies, this time with everything out in the open. Dylan told her about his wife, not just the easy parts, but the hard ones too, the fights they'd had about money, the way grief had made him angry at the world, the nights he'd sat in his truck outside the garage, too afraid to go home and face his son's questions about why his mother wasn't coming back. Vanessa told him about her life before the accident, the pressure of running a company at 28, the loneliness of being surrounded by people who only saw her title, the panic attacks she'd had in her office at 3 a.m, wondering if this was all there was. They were both broken in their own ways, but maybe, Dylan thought, broken things could still fit together. What? A month after that first kiss, Dylan's son figured it out on his own. They were in the kitchen making breakfast. Dylan at the stove, Vanessa setting the table, when the boy walked in and stopped in the doorway. Are you guys dating? He asked, blunt as only a 9-year-old could be. Dylan nearly dropped the spatula. Vanessa froze with a plate in her hand. What makes you think that? Dylan asked carefully. The boy shrugged. You smile different when she's here, and you hold hands sometimes when you think I'm not looking. Dylan and Vanessa exchanged a glance. Vanessa set the plate down and knelt in front of the boy. Would that be okay with you? She asked gently. If your dad and I were dating? The boy thought about it for a moment, his face serious. Then he said, Are you going to leave again? Vanessa's expression crumpled. No, I'm not leaving. Promise? I promise. Okay. The boy nodded, satisfied. Then it's okay. He walked over to the table and sat down like he hadn't just rearranged their entire world with 5 words. Dylan met Vanessa's eyes and she was crying, silent tears streaming down her face. He crossed the kitchen and pulled her into his arms. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For giving me another chance. Dylan kissed the top of her head. You earned it. Spring turned into summer and life found a rhythm. Dylan's son finished the school year strong, made a few friends, and joined a summer art program that met twice a week at the community center. His drawings got better, more detailed, more confident, and he started talking about maybe being an artist when he grew up, maybe illustrating books, maybe doing something with nature and birds. Dylan opened his own garage, a real one this time, not just a rented space, but a building he owned, with his name on the sign out front. It was small, just him and one part-time kid from town who was good with engines, but it was his. And for the first time in years, Dylan felt like he was building something that would last. Vanessa stepped back from Hale Industries, just like she'd said she would. She handed over the CEO position to her second-in-command and stayed on the board, but she wasn't running the company anymore. Wasn't living in hotels and flying to conferences and answering emails at midnight. She was here, in this small town, living a life that looked nothing like the one she'd left behind. Some people thought she was crazy. Her mother called her irresponsible. Her board members said she was throwing away everything she'd built. The press had a field day when the news broke. Billionaire CEO abandons empire for quiet life in the country, and Vanessa ignored all of it. Do you ever regret it? Dylan asked one night. They were sitting on the porch, watching fireflies blink in the dark, and Vanessa had just finished telling him about a particularly nasty article that had accused her of having a breakdown. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Not even a little bit. You gave up a lot. I gave up a job. I didn't give up who I am. Still, you were good at it. I was, Vanessa agreed, but I wasn't happy, and I think that matters more. Dylan kissed her temple. Yeah, it does. Yet, by the end of summer, they'd settled into something that felt like a family. Not a perfect one. Not the kind you saw in movies where everything was easy and no one ever fought, but real, messy, good. Dylan's son called Vanessa by her first name, but he introduced her to his friends as sort of like my mom, which made Vanessa cry the first time she heard it. Dylan and Vanessa argued sometimes about money, about parenting, about stupid things like whose turn it was to do the dishes, but they worked through it, talked it out, apologized when they were wrong. Dylan learned to let Vanessa help without feeling like he was failing. Vanessa learned that love wasn't about control or fixing things, but about showing up and being present even when it was hard. And Dylan's son, he thrived. His checkups with Dr. Kepler were perfect every time. His energy came back. His color was good. The scar on his chest faded from angry red to pale pink, and he wore it like a badge of honor, showing it to his friends and telling the story of his surgery like it was an adventure. He didn't talk about his mother as much anymore, but when he did, it wasn't with the same raw grief. He talked about her like someone he'd loved and lost, but who was still part of him. He kept her picture on his nightstand. He drew birds for her sometimes, leaving the drawings on her grave when they visited on her birthday. And slowly, carefully, he let Vanessa into the spaces his mother had left behind. Well, in October, almost a year after the surgery, Vanessa asked Dylan to marry her. They were at the pond watching his son skip stones across the water when she said it. I want to marry you. Dylan turned to look at her, sure he'd heard wrong. What? I want to marry you, Vanessa repeated, her voice steady. I know it's fast. I know we've only been together a few months. But Dylan, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You and him, you're my family, and I want to make it official. Dylan stared at her, heart pounding. You're serious? Completely. Vanessa, I don't have a ring. I don't have anything to give you. I don't need a ring. I just need you to say yes. Dylan looked at his son, splashing in the shallows, laughing at something only he understood. Then he looked back at Vanessa, at the woman who'd lied to him and broken his heart, and then put it back together piece by piece. "Yes," he said. Vanessa's smile was blinding. "Yeah? Yeah, let's get married." She kissed him hard right there in front of his son, who made a disgusted noise and threw a rock at them. But he was grinning when he did it. They got married in December, on a cold afternoon with snow falling in soft flakes. It wasn't a big wedding, just Dylan's son, Vanessa's mother, Dylan's sister, and a handful of friends. They stood in the backyard of the house under an arch Dylan had built himself and said vows they'd written on scraps of paper the night before. Dylan promised to trust her, to let her in, to stop trying to carry everything alone. Vanessa promised to be honest, to stay, to love his son like he was her own. And when the officiant said they were married, Dylan's son cheered louder than anyone. The reception was small, pizza and beer and a cake from the bakery in town that leaned slightly to one side. Dylan's son gave a speech that was mostly about how Vanessa made better pancakes than Dylan, which got a huge laugh. Vanessa's mother cried through the whole thing, telling anyone who would listen that her daughter had finally found happiness. And Dylan? Dylan just watched his wife dance with his son in the living room, both of them laughing, and felt something settle deep in his chest. This was it. This was everything he'd thought he'd lost when his first wife died. The noise, the warmth, the feeling of being part of something bigger than himself. He hadn't been looking for it, but it had found him anyway. The first year of marriage wasn't easy. Vanessa struggled with letting go of her old life completely. She'd wake up at 5 in the morning out of habit, reaching for her phone, expecting a crisis that wasn't there anymore. She missed the pace sometimes, missed feeling important, missed the adrenaline of closing a deal or fixing a problem no one else could solve. Dylan struggled with feeling like he'd never be enough. He'd see the way people looked at Vanessa in town, this beautiful, successful woman who could have had anyone, and wonder what she was doing with a mechanic who barely finished high school. He'd catch himself waiting for her to realize she'd made a mistake, to wake up one day and decide this wasn't the life she wanted after all. But they talked about it. On the nights when Vanessa felt restless, Dylan would remind her that value wasn't measured in profit margins or board meetings, that the work she did here, helping his son with homework, volunteering at the community center, teaching art classes to kids who couldn't afford supplies, mattered just as much. On the nights when Dylan felt small, Vanessa would remind him that she'd spent her whole life surrounded by powerful people who only cared about what she could do for them. And he was the first person who'd ever seen her as just Vanessa, who'd loved her not because of what she had, but because of who she was. They figured it out, not perfectly, not without stumbling, but they figured it out. Dylan's son turned 10 in March. They threw him a party at the house, his first real birthday party since before his mother died. He invited 12 kids from school and art class, and they ran wild through the property, playing games Dylan didn't understand and eating cake until they were practically vibrating. At the end of the night, after all the guests had gone home and the house was quiet again, the boy sat on the couch between Dylan and Vanessa with his new sketchbook in his lap. "This was the best birthday ever," he said. Dylan ruffled his hair. "Yeah? Yeah, because everyone I love was here." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. "We love you too, kiddo." The boy looked up at her, serious suddenly. "Can I call you Mom?" Vanessa's breath caught. She glanced at Dylan, who nodded, his own throat tight. "If you want to," Vanessa said, her voice shaking. "I would be honored." The boy smiled. "Okay, Mom." And just like that, the last piece fell into place. By the time summer rolled around again, they'd built a life that felt solid. Dylan's garage was doing well enough that he hired another mechanic. Vanessa started a nonprofit that funded art programs in rural schools. Dylan's son was thriving, healthier, happier, more confident than Dylan had ever seen him. They took a vacation that July, the three of them piling into Dylan's truck and driving west until they hit the mountains. They hiked trails that made Dylan's legs burn, and Vanessa complained about blisters. They camped under stars so bright it felt like you could reach up and touch them. They sat around a fire and told stories and laughed until their stomachs hurt. And one night, when his son was asleep in the tent, and Dylan and Vanessa were alone by the dying embers, Dylan said something he hadn't planned to say. "I think she would have liked you." Vanessa looked at him. "Your wife?" "Yeah. She would have liked how you love him, how you don't try to replace her, but you make space for yourself anyway." Vanessa took his hand. "I hope so. I know so." Dylan paused, staring into the fire. "I spent a long time thinking I'd never be happy again, that losing her meant losing everything. But you taught me that's not how it works. You can lose something and still find something else. You can grieve and still love. It doesn't have to be one or the other." "No," Vanessa agreed softly. "It doesn't. Thank you for showing me that." "Thank you for letting me in." They sat in silence, hands linked, and Dylan thought about the path that had led them here. The accident, the lies, the surgery, the fear and the heartbreak, and the slow, painful rebuilding. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Chit. 2 years after the surgery, Dr. Kepler cleared Dylan's son completely. No more checkups, no more restrictions, no more worrying that his heart might fail. He was healthy, whole, free to live his life without the shadow of illness hanging over him. They celebrated with dinner at the boys' favorite restaurant, a diner with greasy burgers and milkshakes so thick you needed a spoon. And Dylan watched his son laugh at something Vanessa said and felt his chest tighten with gratitude. This kid had almost died, and now he was here, thriving, making jokes, planning his future. It was a gift Dylan would never take for granted. On a quiet evening in late September, 3 years after Dylan had pulled Vanessa from that burning wreck, they sat on the porch together while their son worked on a drawing inside. "Do you ever think about that night?" Vanessa asked. "On Route 12? "Sometimes," Dylan admitted. "I think about how close you came, how different everything would be if I'd just kept driving. I think about that too. About how you didn't have to stop, how you could have just called 911 and left. But you didn't." "I couldn't." "I know. And that's what makes you who you are." Dylan looked at her. "You know what's funny? I spent so long being angry at you for lying, but if you told me the truth that first day, if you'd shown up as Vanessa Hale, billionaire, CEO, I never would have let you in. I would have said thank you and sent you on your way." "So the lie brought us together," Vanessa said quietly. "And the truth kept us together." She smiled. "I like that." "Me too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink below the trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Inside, Dylan could hear his son humming to himself, lost in his art, safe and happy and loved. This was the life they'd built, not from perfection, not from some fairy tale romance where everything worked out easily, but from mistakes and second chances, from heartbreak and healing, from choosing each other over and over again, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Dylan's son showed them the drawing later that night. It was a family portrait, the three of them standing by the pond, the house in the background, birds flying overhead. He'd worked on it for weeks, adding details, getting the proportions right, pouring his heart into every line. "It's for you guys," he said, shy suddenly. "For your anniversary." Vanessa started crying immediately. Dylan pulled the boy into a hug so tight he complained, but he was smiling when Dylan finally let go. They framed it and hung it in the living room, right above the fireplace where everyone could see it. And every time Dylan looked at it, he thought about the journey they'd taken to get here. The fear, the doubt, the moments when he'd wanted to give up and walk away. But he hadn't. They hadn't. And that made all the difference. Years later, when people asked Dylan how he'd met his wife, he never knew quite what to say. Because the truth was complicated, messy, full of mistakes and lies and moments he wasn't proud of. But it was also beautiful. It was a story about a man who stopped to help a stranger because it was the right thing to do. About a woman who searched for him because she wanted to say thank you. About lies that hurt and truths that healed. About a little boy who almost died and a surgery that saved his life. About two broken people who found each other in the wreckage and decided to build something new. It wasn't a perfect story, but it was theirs. And in the end, that was all that mattered. What? On a spring morning, 5 years after the surgery, Dylan woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of laughter drifting up from the kitchen. He got out of bed and walked downstairs to find Vanessa and his son, 13 now, tall and lanky, and starting to look more like a man than a boy, making pancakes, badly. There was batter on the counter, on the floor, on Vanessa's face. "What happened here?" Dylan asked, trying not to laugh. "Creative differences about ratios," Vanessa said, wiping her face with a towel. "She used too much milk," his son added. "You used too much flour." "Did not." "Did too." Dylan shook his head, smiling. "You're both disasters." "But we're your disasters," Vanessa said, grinning. "Yeah," Dylan agreed, crossing the kitchen to kiss her. "You are." His son made a gagging noise, but he was smiling too. They ate burnt pancakes at the kitchen table, argued about whether birds were actually dinosaurs, and made plans for the weekend. Dylan's son wanted to go to the art supply store. Vanessa wanted to check out a new hiking trail. Dylan just wanted to be with them. And as he sat there, listening to the two people he loved most in the world bicker about pancakes and laugh at their own terrible jokes, Dylan realized something. He'd spent so long trying to control everything, trying to protect his son from pain, trying to build a life that was safe and predictable and contained. But life wasn't meant to be controlled. It was meant to be lived. Messy and complicated and full of surprises you never saw coming. Full of people who lied and people who forgave. Full of heartbreak and second chances and moments that changed everything. And the people who mattered weren't the ones who were perfect. They were the ones who showed up, who stayed, who fought for you even when you pushed them away. Vanessa had shown up on a foggy morning 2 years after he'd saved her life, and she'd lied about who she was. But she'd also stayed. Through the anger and the fear and the surgery and the recovery. Through every hard conversation and painful moment. Through all of it. And that was what love was. Not perfection, not some fairy tale ending where nothing ever went wrong, but showing up, choosing each other, building something real out of the broken pieces. Dylan reached across the table and took Vanessa's hand. She looked at him, surprised, and he smiled. "I love you," he said. "I love you too." Their son rolled his eyes. "Can we please eat before the pancakes get cold?" They laughed, and Dylan squeezed Vanessa's hand once more before letting go. This was his life now. Not the one he'd planned. Not the one he'd imagined when he was young and stupid and thought he had everything figured out. But it was a good life. A real life. And he wouldn't trade it for anything. Because sometimes the best things in life are the ones you never saw coming. The ones that start with a lie and end with the truth. The ones that break your heart and then put it back together stronger than before. Sometimes you save someone's life and they end up saving yours. And sometimes when you stop trying to control everything and just let yourself fall, you find exactly what you've been looking for all along. A family, a home, a reason to keep going even when the world feels too heavy. Dylan had found all of that in the most unexpected place, in a woman who'd lied to him, in a son who'd almost died, in a life he'd built from nothing but hope and second chances. And he was grateful for every single moment, even the hard ones, especially the hard ones, because those were the moments that taught him what really mattered. Not money, not success, not having all the answers, but love, forgiveness, the courage to let people in even when you're scared they'll leave. Those were the things that made life worth living. And Dylan Carter, mechanic, father, husband, had learned that lesson the hard way. But he'd learned it, and he'd never forget it.